What if we almost met them? Not in a movie, not in a fantasy, not in the kind of story where the rules of reality get quietly set aside to make room for something more exciting. In actual geological bone and stone reality. In the history of this real world. What if the gap between the last of the great dinosaurs and the first creatures that could be called our ancestors was not 66 million years wide, as every textbook confidently states, but something smaller, something closer? What if somewhere in the vast, slow-moving story of life on Earth, two extraordinary lineages came within reach of each other, and the thing that kept them apart was not inevitability, but chance? That is the question we're going to explore tonight. We're going to move through it slowly, gently, the way you move through deep water, not fighting the current, just letting it carry you. We're going to travel back through time, through layer after geological layer of the Earth's long memory, and we are going to ask, how close did we come? How thin was the veil between the age of the dinosaurs and the age of the creatures that would eventually become us? We want to thank you for supporting us, and it would mean so much if you could support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing to help us keep this channel going. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. Anyways, back to the video. The answer, it turns out, is more complicated and more interesting than the simple number of 66 million years suggests. The story of how the dinosaurs ended and how our ancestors began is a story full of near misses and contingencies, of moments when things might have gone differently, of evolutionary threads that came remarkably close to tangling in ways that never quite occurred. It is a story about deep time and improbable survival, and the strange, fragile luck that underlies all existence. And it is a story worth telling slowly in the dark while the rest of the world sleeps. Let yourself settle a little deeper into wherever you are right now. The floor beneath you, the surface beneath you, let it hold you completely. There is nothing you need to do. Nowhere you need to go. The world can wait. We are going to travel a long way tonight, and the only thing required of you is to breathe and listen and let the images form behind your eyes. The story is beginning. To understand how close humans and dinosaurs almost came to sharing the Earth, we first have to understand just how enormous the distance between them really was, and to do that, we have to go back, not just a little back, not back to ancient history, or even to the dawn of civilization, or even to the first appearance of our species. We have to go back so far that the word ancient loses its meaning, and what replaces it is something more like incomprehensible, more like geological, more like the particular vertigo that comes from staring too long into the night sky and realizing that the light reaching your eyes left its source before the Earth existed. We are going to 80 million years ago, give or take. In the grand scheme of geological time, that uncertainty of a few million years barely registers. The planet looks familiar in outline and alien in detail. The continents are almost in their current positions. You would recognize the basic shapes if you saw them from space. The rough triangle of Africa, the linked land masses of the Americas, the sprawl of Eurasia. But the details are wrong in ways that would unsettle you. The Atlantic Ocean is narrower. The North American Interior Seaway, a shallow, warm body of water stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Arctic Ocean, divides North America into two large land masses. The Antarctic continent exists, but it is forested, ice-free, home to a rich and varied terrestrial ecosystem rather than the frozen and empty expanse we know today. The climate is warm, beautifully, extravagantly warm by modern standards. There are no permanent polar ice caps. Global average temperatures are somewhere between 6 and 12 degrees Celsius higher than today. The tropics are hot and humid. The higher latitudes are temperate and lush. Forests grow far north and south of the zones where we would expect them today. The seas are high and warm, teeming with life in a way that our oceans, depleted by tens of millions of years of evolution and recent human activity, can barely match. This is the late Cretaceous period, and it belongs, without qualification, without competition, without any meaningful challenge from any other group of organisms, to the dinosaurs. They have been ruling the land for over 100 million years at this point. Think carefully about what that means. 100 million years. Try to place that against something familiar. All of human civilization. Every empire that ever rose and fell, every great city ever built, every invention that ever changed the world, spans perhaps 10,000 years of recorded history. Before that, the pre-agricultural period of our species goes back perhaps 300,000 years to the earliest anatomically modern humans. The entire genus Homo, including all our ancestors back to the first upright walking beings who can be called members of our family, goes back about 3 million years. The entire primate order, including all monkeys and apes and lemurs and everything in between, goes back perhaps 80 million years. The dinosaurs were ruling the land before the primates existed. They were ruling the land while the primates evolved. They were ruling the land long before anything that would one day lead to humans had taken shape in any meaningful way. 100 million years of dominance, a span of time so large that the entire history of the primates fits comfortably inside it, with room to spare. Walk through the late Cretaceous world and the most immediately striking thing is the scale. The world is full of large animals, and they move through it with the particular confidence of creatures that have never known a serious competitor for their ecological position. A triceratops browses at the forest edge, and it moves slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried patience of something that weighs 6 to 8 tons and has very few predators to worry about. Its 3 horns are impressive instruments of defense, and the great bony frill behind its skull catches the light in patterns of orange and red that serve some signaling purpose we can only guess at now. It pulls vegetation with its beak, chews slowly, and shows no particular interest in the smaller animals moving in the undergrowth nearby. Those smaller animals in the undergrowth include a variety of small theropod dinosaurs, feathered, quick-moving creatures that hunt insects and small vertebrates in the dense vegetation. They are unimpressive in size, perhaps the length of a large crow or a small hawk, but their movements are alert and precise in the way that small, intelligent predators always move. They have forward-facing eyes set in narrow skulls, and the way they tilt those heads and flick their gaze from side to side suggests a kind of mental engagement with the world that the massive herbivore at the forest edge does not display. In the high branches of the trees, early flowering trees, magnolias and their relatives, the first fig trees, primitive laurels whose leaves smell of something ancient and sweet, small mammals move in the twilight between the upper canopy and the lower shade. They are not impressive. They are the size of shrews mostly, or perhaps a large mouse. They have big eyes for the dim light they prefer, and they move with the careful quickness of creatures that are, on a fundamental level, prey. They are insectivores, seed-eaters, opportunistic omnivores. If you watch them for an hour, you might not be particularly impressed. They seem, by comparison with the animals that dominate the landscape below them, almost irrelevant. Almost? In the sky above the trees, a pterosaur wheels on a thermal. Its wingspan is broad and its shadow crosses the canopy below in a slow, sweeping arc. It is not a bird, though it looks like one from this distance. It is something stranger, a flying reptile whose lineage diverged from the dinosaurs over 200 million years ago and has been experimenting with flight ever since, developing solutions to the engineering problems of aerial locomotion that are completely different from the solutions birds would eventually develop. The pterosaur's wing membrane stretches between an enormously elongated fourth finger and its hind limbs. The wing of a bird, when it eventually appears, will be built on a completely different principle. A different finger, a different attachment, a different aerodynamic profile. For now, in this Cretaceous afternoon, the pterosaur has the sky largely to itself. Birds exist. They have been evolving from their theropod ancestors for 80 million years by this point. But they are still small, still diversifying, still exploring the ecological niches available to a feathered, beaked, warm-blooded flying vertebrate. The sky, in the late Cretaceous, is contested territory, and the pterosaurs are not yet finished contesting it. Below the water's surface, in the shallow inland sea that divides North America, in the warm coastal shallows around the world, the marine ecosystems of the late Cretaceous are as extraordinary as the terrestrial ones. Mosasaurs, enormous predatory reptiles distantly related to modern monitor lizards, have evolved into the dominant large predators of the oceans. The largest of them are over 15 meters long, longer than a school bus, heavier than a large elephant, and they move through the warm water with a sinuous, terrifying efficiency. Nothing in the Cretaceous ocean wants to be noticed by a mosasaur. Ammonites drift in the middle layers of the water column, extraordinary animals, relatives of squid and octopus, encased in coiled shells that range from the size of a coin to the size of a cartwheel. There are hundreds of species of ammonites in the late Cretaceous seas. They are, in their quiet, drifting way, one of the most successful groups of animals in the history of the oceans, having diversified and rediversified across tens of millions of years. They look ancient because they are ancient. They look like something that belongs in a different era than the one we live in, which is exactly what they are. None of the animals in this Cretaceous world have any sense of what is coming. There is no drama, no foreboding, no sign in the rocks, or the water or the sky that anything is about to change. The late Cretaceous world is not a world in decline. Paleontologists spent decades arguing about whether dinosaur diversity was decreasing in the late Cretaceous, whether the Great Extinction event was preceded by a long, slow decline. But the current consensus is that it was not. Dinosaur diversity was high right up to the end. The world was full of species, full of ecological complexity, full of the ordinary business of life, eating, reproducing, competing, dying, evolving. And then, 66 million years ago, it changed. But before we get to that change, before we watch the sky fall on the Cretaceous world, let us take a moment to appreciate something. Let us take a moment to appreciate how thoroughly the dinosaurs had made this world their own. The forests, the plains, the coasts, the highlands. Every ecosystem on the Cretaceous Earth bore the imprint of 100 million years of dinosaur activity. The plants had evolved in response to dinosaur browsing and trampling. The insects had evolved in response to the plants. The smaller reptiles and the mammals had evolved in response to the predation pressure of the dinosaurs. The very structure of the terrestrial ecosystem of the late Cretaceous was shaped in its fundamental architecture by the long presence of the dinosaurs. They were not just the largest animals, they were the organizing principle around which everything else had arranged itself. And the small, unimpressive tree-climbing mammals in the canopy, the ones that would eventually give rise to the primates, and the primates to the apes, and the apes to the hominins, and the hominins to us. Those mammals had been shaped by the dinosaurs too. Their nocturnal habits were a response to the dominance of dinosaurs in the daylight hours. Their small size was a response to the ecological dominance of larger dinosaurian competitors. Their intelligence, their grasping hands, their binocular vision, all of the traits that would eventually make the primate lineage so successful were adaptations to living in the complex, three-dimensional environment of the forest canopy, in the narrow ecological margins that the dinosaurs had left available. The dinosaurs made us possible, in a sense, not directly, not intentionally, but causally. The evolutionary pressures they created shaped the lineage that would survive them. The world they built was the world our ancestors first learned to navigate. And in 66 million years, that world was going to end. Let yourself breathe slowly now. Let the vivid green of the Cretaceous world settle in your mind like something you can almost remember. The sound of water moving through a warm forest. The distant rhythmic impact of enormous feet on soft earth. The rustling of something feathered and quick in the undergrowth. The particular quality of light in a world before humans, before cities, before fire. Just the pure, ancient, uncomplicated light of a sun on a living world. Rest in that image for a moment. We are about to move forward. The clock is ticking. There are moments in the history of the Earth when everything changes. Not gradually, not in the slow, patient way that evolution and geology usually work, but fast. Fast enough to register as instantaneous even on geological timescales. The formation of the Moon, when a Mars-sized body struck the early Earth and the debris coalesced into our satellite. The Great Oxidation event, when photosynthetic bacteria began flooding the atmosphere with oxygen and killed most of the life that existed at the time. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, the Great Dying, when 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species disappeared in what geologists can only call an eye blink of time. And then, 66 million years ago, the most famous catastrophe in the history of complex life. The asteroid was roughly 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter. That is about the width of the island of Manhattan, give or take. It was travelling at somewhere between 20 and 40 kilometers per second when it entered the Earth's atmosphere, faster than any object a human being has ever launched intentionally. At that speed, the friction with the atmosphere would have heated its leading face to temperatures higher than the surface of the Sun. It struck the shallow seas off the coast of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in southeastern Mexico. The site of the impact, discovered in the 1970s and confirmed in the 1990s, is called the Chicxulub crater, named for a small town near the centre of the impact structure. The crater is roughly 150 kilometres in diameter and about 20 kilometres deep. It is one of the largest confirmed impact craters on Earth, and its formation happened in seconds. Not years, not decades, seconds. The immediate effects of the impact were regional rather than global, though regional here means a zone of devastation spanning thousands of kilometres. Everything within a few hundred kilometres of the impact site was vaporised. The superheated ejector, rock turned to vapour and plasma by the force of the impact, shot through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds, some of it reaching escape velocity and leaving the Earth entirely, the rest falling back to the surface over the following hours as a rain of hot debris that set fires across enormous areas. The tsunamis generated by the impact were extraordinary. The Gulf of Mexico, already shallow, was entirely disrupted. Waves hundreds of meters high crossed the sea and reached coastal areas, thousands of kilometers from the impact site. The geological record of the Chicxulub impact includes, in many sites, a distinct layer of tsunami deposits, sand and gravel and marine shells carried far inland by waves whose scale has never been seen in any human-recorded history. But these immediate regional effects, devastating as they were not the primary cause of the global extinction. The global extinction was caused by what came after. The impact vaporized an enormous amount of sulfur-bearing rock. The Yucatan Peninsula is built on a thick layer of evaporite deposits, rich in sulfur. This sulfur was blasted into the upper atmosphere, where it combined with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets acted like tiny mirrors, reflecting sunlight back into space and cooling the planet below. Within weeks, global temperatures began to drop. Within months, they had dropped significantly, by some estimates more than 10 degrees Celsius in the mid-latitudes. The darkness came too. The impact had lofted enormous quantities of fine particulate matter, vaporized rock, soot from the global fires, dust, into the stratosphere. This particulate matter did not settle quickly. It circled the globe, blocking a significant fraction of the sunlight that normally reaches the Earth's surface. For months, perhaps for a year or two, the world was darker than it had been since the early days of the solar system. Plants, unable to photosynthesize, began to die. The base of the food chain collapsed. And then, slowly, inexorably, the animals that depended on those plants began to die too. The great sauropods, those magnificent long-necked giants that had browsed the treetops and reshaped the landscapes of the Mesozoic, went first. They were simply too large. Their metabolic requirements were too enormous. They could not survive on the diminished food supply of a darkened, cooling world. They had no fat reserves sufficient to carry them through years of scarcity. They starved. The large ceratopsians, the hadrosaurs, the ankylosaurs, all the great diverse assemblage of large herbivorous dinosaur, followed. Their populations collapsed as the food supply collapsed. The ecosystems that had supported them for millions of years, those complex, balanced, intricately connected webs of plants and animals, unravelled at extraordinary speed. The carnivorous dinosaurs lasted a little longer, perhaps. They could scavenge the enormous number of dying herbivores. They could be opportunistic. But eventually there was nothing left to eat. Even the tyrannosaurs, those ultimate generalists, those kings of the late Cretaceous apex, could not survive in a world where the prey base had collapsed. The extinction was devastating. The numbers are almost too large to absorb. Roughly 75% of all species on Earth went extinct in a geologically brief period around the KPG boundary. The non-avian dinosaurs, of course, but also the pterosaurs, the marine reptiles, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, the ammonites that had drifted in the world's oceans for hundreds of millions of years, many lineages of fish, many lineages of invertebrates, the marine ecosystems of the late Cretaceous, which had been among the most diverse and productive in Earth's history, were savaged. But here, and this is the crucial point, the pivot around which tonight's entire story turns, here is what did not happen. Life did not end. Not even close. Life, which had survived every previous extinction event in the long history of the Earth, survived this one too. Not all of it. Most of it did not, but enough. Enough to begin again, to fill the empty world with new forms, new strategies, new experiments in the inexhaustible biological exploration of what a living thing can be. In sheltered places, in microhabitats that the worst of the impact effects did not reach, in the bodies of small, adaptable, opportunistic creatures that could eat almost anything and needed very little to survive, life held on. In the deep ocean, where the disruption was slower and the darkness less complete, some marine species found refuge and persisted through the worst years. In the soil, the seeds and eggs and spores of countless organisms waited with the patience of things that have evolved for exactly this kind of waiting. And in the trees, in the forest canopy and the forest floor of what would become the early Paleocene world, the small mammals that had spent tens of millions of years in the shadow of the dinosaurs found themselves, for the first time in their evolutionary history, in a world with no dinosaurs. It must have been a terrifying world at first. Dark, cold, strange. The familiar sounds of the Cretaceous forest gone. No distant thunder of great sauropod feet. No calls of the various theropods. No rustling of large herbivores through the undergrowth. Just silence and darkness and the cold and the terrible abundance of death. But it was also, in the deepest and most consequential possible sense, open. Let that word sit with you for a moment. Open. A world that had been organised around the presence and the dominance of the dinosaurs, suddenly open. Every ecological niche that the dinosaurs had occupied. Every role in every ecosystem that the 165 million year reign of the dinosaurs had filled, suddenly available, suddenly waiting. The mammals were about to step into that openness, and what they would do with it over the next 66 million years is the other half of the story we are telling tonight. But before we follow them, before we trace the long, improbable journey from the first small post-impact mammals to the creatures that would eventually become us, let us take one more moment with the dinosaurs. Because the story of the extinction is not entirely a story of ending. Some of the dinosaurs did not die. The birds. This is worth saying clearly because it is so easy to forget, or to treat it as a footnote when it is actually one of the most important facts in all of evolutionary biology. Birds are dinosaurs, not descended from dinosaurs, not similar to dinosaurs, not the evolutionary successors to dinosaurs. Birds are dinosaurs, a living lineage of theropod dinosaurs that evolved during the Jurassic period and carried the dinosaur legacy through the KPG extinction and into the world we live in today. The dinosaur lineage never ended. It transformed, it miniaturized, it took to the skies, and it is still here. There are somewhere between 10,000 and 11,000 species of birds alive on Earth right now. Every single one of them is a dinosaur. Every sparrow and eagle and penguin and hummingbird and crow and albatross and tiny brown warbler singing in a hedgerow at dawn. All of them, carrying in their cells and their bones and their behaviour the ancient genetic heritage of the most successful land animal lineage in Earth's history. The dinosaurs never really left. We just stopped looking for them in the right places. And that fact, that the dinosaurs are still here, right now, all around us, in the form of every bird alive, that fact will become important again before our story is finished. Let yourself drift a little now. Let the images of the Cretaceous settle. You can almost hear the silence that followed the impact, that strange, cold, dark quiet of a world between things, the world that was about to be. And in that silence, something small and warm and frightened moves through the dark, nosing through the leaf litter, surviving. That small, warm, frightened thing is your great-great-great, how many greats would we need? Grandmother, and she's about to inherit the Earth. The word that best describes the 10 million years following the KPG extinction event is not recovery. Recovery implies returning to a previous state, going back to what was before, and that is not what happened. What happened was something more radical, more creative, more fundamentally new. The word that fits better is radiation. Adaptive radiation, the explosive diversification of a lineage into a wide variety of ecological niches, driven by the availability of those niches and the absence of competitors to fill them. Evolution operating at something approaching its maximum possible speed, because the opportunities are vast and the constraints are few, and the only limit is the creativity of the genetic variation that natural selection has to work with. The mammals radiated. Within the first 10 million years after the extinction event, the Paleocene epoch, roughly 66 to 56 million years ago, mammals went from a small number of similar-looking, small-bodied survivors to an extraordinary variety of forms. Some grew large, some went back to the water, some took to the trees, some developed specializations for eating plants, for eating other mammals, for eating insects, for eating seeds, for eating fruit. The basic mammalian body plan, warm-blooded, fur-covered, live-bearing, milk-producing, with a complex brain and a flexible social life, proved to be almost infinitely adaptable. You could build almost anything from it, given enough time and enough selection pressure. The Paleocene is not a period that gets much attention in popular accounts of Earth's history. It lacks the dramatic appeal of the Cretaceous, with its giants and its catastrophic ending. It lacks the later glamour of the Pleistocene ice ages, with their mammoths and cave lions and early humans. The Paleocene is, in popular imagination, a sort of interlude, the world catching its breath between acts. But that characterization does it a profound injustice, because the Paleocene is where the future was being assembled. The early Paleocene mammals were strange by our standards. They did not look like the mammals we know today. They were not horses or elephants or lions or anything else recognizable. They were, in some cases, things that evolution was simply trying out, body plans and ecological strategies that would eventually be superseded by later developments, abandoned like drafts of a paragraph that didn't quite work. There were the condylarths, early ungulates that looked vaguely like a blend of dog and tapir and anteater, running through the Paleocene forests on spreading hoofed feet. There were the multituberculates, an ancient lineage of rodent-like mammals that had actually coexisted with the dinosaurs for tens of millions of years and survived the KPG extinction, only to be replaced by more modern rodents in the later Eocene. There were the pantodonts, pig-sized and plodding, browsing through the early Paleocene forests with a certain unhurried confidence that spoke of a world where the great predators of the Cretaceous were gone, and the new predators had not yet risen to their full potential. And in the trees, always in the trees, the primates were beginning. The earliest primates are not well known from fossils. We know they existed by the early Paleocene because of indirect evidence, because the lineage that would eventually produce them was already present in the late Cretaceous, according to molecular clock estimates that track the accumulated genetic differences between living species and calculate backward to when their lineages must have diverged. But the actual physical remains of these earliest primates are scrappy, fragmentary, difficult to interpret. A tooth here, a fragment of jaw there. Enough to confirm that they existed, not enough to tell us exactly what they looked like or how they lived. What we do know is that the earliest primates were small, very small, probably the size of a shrew or a small mouse, and that they lived in trees, and that they ate insects, and possibly small amounts of plant material. They had the beginnings of the grasping hands that would eventually become the signature trait of the primate order. Nails instead of claws on some digits, allowing a more secure grip on branches. They had the beginnings of forward-facing eyes, providing the binocular depth perception that is so valuable for a creature navigating the three-dimensional world of the forest canopy. They were, in other words, already beginning to develop the toolkit that would eventually make primates, and through them, hominins, and through them, us, so distinctively capable. The Eocene epoch followed the Paleocene, roughly 56 to 34 million years ago, and for much of its duration the world was warm, beautifully, lushly, almost extravagantly warm. The early Eocene in particular was one of the warmest periods in Earth's history since the Cretaceous, a time called the Eocene climatic optimum, when global temperatures peaked at somewhere between 12 and 16 degrees Celsius above modern averages. There were tropical forests at latitudes where today we find boreal forests and tundra. Crocodiles lived in what is now Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic. Palm trees and magnolias grew in what is now southern England. The Arctic Ocean may have had surface temperatures warm enough for swimming in the summer months. In this warm, lush world, the primates thrived and diversified. They spread across the northern hemisphere, Europe, Asia, North America, all of which were connected or nearly connected during much of the Eocene, and they experimented with every variation of the basic primate body plan. Some became specialists in eating leaves, others became specialists in eating fruit, others remained dedicated insectivores, some grew larger, others stayed small. The Eocene primate fossil record, particularly in Europe and Asia, is rich with genera and species that represent the full range of the order's early evolutionary experimentation. And from this experimentation, over millions of years, a particular kind of primate began to emerge, larger than most, with a bigger brain relative to body size, with a more complex social life, with a life history, slower development, longer childhood, longer lifespan, lower reproductive rate, that invested more heavily in each individual offspring and less in sheer numbers. These were the first anthropoids, the group that includes monkeys, apes, and ultimately humans, and their appearance in the fossil record in the late Eocene and early Oligocene represents one of the key transitions in the story leading to us. The Oligocene epoch, roughly 34 to 23 million years ago, was a time of cooling. The Antarctic ice cap, which had been absent or minimal through most of the Eocene, began to form. Global temperatures dropped. The lush tropical forests of the earlier period contracted. Grasslands began to appear in the interiors of continents. The world was becoming, in a general sense, more like the world we would recognize. For the primates, the Oligocene was a time of transition. Some lineages declined as the forests shrank. Others adapted to more seasonal environments. In Africa, the cradle of what would eventually become the human lineage, the anthropoid primates continued to diversify through the Oligocene, experimenting with different body sizes and dietary strategies and social structures. And then came the Miocene, roughly 23 to 5 million years ago, and with it the great age of the apes. The apes, the hominoids, the group that today includes gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees and humans, first diversified during the Miocene into an extraordinary array of species. We are today the survivors of a great ape radiation that produced dozens of genera and hundreds of species over the course of the Miocene. At the peak of ape diversity, somewhere around 15 or 20 million years ago, apes were a dominant presence in the forests of Africa and Eurasia. They were not rare, they were not marginal, they were the successful, large-bodied, intelligent primates of a warm and forested world. Most of them went extinct as the Miocene world cooled and dried, as the forest contracted and the grasslands expanded, as the ecological conditions that had supported such diversity changed into something less accommodating. The living apes, the handful of genera that survive today, are the remnant of that great Miocene radiation. We are the survivors of a mass extinction of our own evolutionary relatives. And from among those survivors, in the last 7 or 8 million years of the Miocene and into the Pliocene, something new began to appear in the African fossil record. Something that walked upright. Something that showed, for the first time in the history of life on Earth, the suite of traits that would eventually define the human lineage. The hominins were beginning. We are still millions of years away from anything that could be called human in any meaningful sense. But the direction is established. The trajectory is set. The long, patient, improbable journey from the first tree-climbing mammals of the Paleocene to the strange, upright, questioning creatures that we are, that journey is in its final chapters. And through it all, through all of this 66 million year history of mammalian diversification and primate evolution and ape radiation and hominin emergence, the dinosaurs have been here. Not the non-avian dinosaurs, not the Triceratops or the T-Rex or the hadrosaurs or the sauropods. Those are gone, their lineages ended in the catastrophe at the KPG boundary. But the birds, the living dinosaurs, present through every epoch, every era, every stage of the mammalian story. Evolving alongside the mammals, competing with them for insects and seeds and other resources, adapting to the same changing climates that shape the mammals, sometimes abundant and dominant, sometimes reduced in diversity and struggling, but always there. The dinosaurs and the mammals have been coexisting, in a real and meaningful sense, for the entire history of the mammals. The two lineages have been sharing the Earth for 66 million years. And from that perspective, from the perspective of the actual history of life rather than the imaginary history we are also exploring tonight, the question of whether humans and dinosaurs coexisted has a simpler answer than the one we have been pursuing. They do, right now, today. You and the dinosaurs are alive at the same time. The dinosaurs you coexist with are just smaller and feathered and capable of something beautiful, that their Mesozoic ancestors never managed. They sing. Think about that as you rest deeper into this moment. The song outside your window in the morning, the ordinary, miraculous song of birds that is the voice of the dinosaurs, still here, still calling, still filling the air with the evidence of their ancient and enduring presence. Let us now turn to the heart of our question. Let us examine, with care and with an appropriate sense of the uncertainty involved, the actual gap between the last non-avian dinosaurs and the first hominins. The number we are given in textbooks is 66 million years. This is the gap between the KPG extinction event, dated with great precision to approximately 66.038 million years ago, and the present. And the present, of course, includes us. The gap between the last non-avian dinosaurs and the first anatomically modern humans is roughly 65.7 million years. But what if we do not use modern humans as our reference point? What if we trace the human lineage back as far as it will honestly go? The earliest known member of the hominin tribe, the group that includes humans and all our ancestors after the split from the chimpanzee lineage, is a creature called Sahelanthropus chadensis. It was discovered in Chad in 2001 and has been dated to approximately 7 million years ago. The evidence that it was a hominin rather than an ancestral ape rests primarily on features of its skull that suggest it may have been capable of upright walking. A small foramen magnum positioned toward the bottom of the skull rather than the back, which is consistent with a bipedal posture. This interpretation is not universally accepted. Some researchers argue that the evidence for bipedalism in Sahelanthropus is ambiguous, and that it may simply have been a large ground-dwelling ape. But even the most cautious reading of the evidence places it at, or very near the base of the human family tree. 7 million years. The gap between Sahelanthropus and the last non-avian dinosaurs is approximately 59 million years, not 66 million years, 59. That difference, 7 million years, might seem trivial, and in absolute terms, it is. 7 million years is still an almost unimaginable span of time. It is twice the age of the entire human family tree. It is long enough for a significant amount of geological change, evolutionary diversification, and climate variation. But the difference matters in the context of our question, because it demonstrates that the gap between us and the dinosaurs is not a fixed, immovable number. It depends on what we mean by us. And the further back we are willing to extend that definition, the more generously we are willing to interpret the word human, the shorter the gap becomes. Now let us look at the other end. Let us ask, are we absolutely certain that all non-avian dinosaurs went extinct precisely at the KPG boundary? The answer is yes, in the sense that the scientific consensus is strongly in favour of this position, and the evidence supporting it is overwhelming. But the answer is also, in a more nuanced sense, more complicated. And the complications are worth exploring. The KPG boundary is real, and the extinction was real, and the evidence is clear. The iridium layer that marks the asteroid impact is found worldwide, and above it, in rock layers that date to after the impact, non-avian dinosaur fossils are absent. This pattern has been documented across multiple continents, in many different geological settings, by many different researchers over many decades. The mass extinction of non-avian dinosaurs at the KPG boundary is one of the most thoroughly documented facts in all of paleontology. But there are complications. First, there is the Signor-Lipps effect, which we will explore more fully in a later act of tonight's story. This is the observation that in the fossil record, the last known fossil of a species always predates the actual moment of extinction, because the probability of fossilization is low, and the probability of a fossil being preserved right up to the moment of extinction is lower still. This means that our apparent extinction dates are systematically earlier than the actual extinction dates. By how much? It varies enormously depending on the species, the ecosystem, the geological conditions. But the principle is robust. The fossil record makes extinctions look earlier than they were. Second, there is the genuine possibility, not a fringe possibility, but a serious scientific hypothesis that has been published in peer-reviewed journals, that some isolated populations of non-avian dinosaurs may have survived the KPG extinction for a period of time, perhaps thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands of years, in refugia where the worst effects of the impact were less severe. This hypothesis is based on the characteristics of the impact itself, the fact that its effects, though global, were not perfectly uniform, and on the biology of the most likely survivor candidates, which would have been small, adaptable, opportunistic theropods capable of surviving on reduced food supplies. The evidence for Paleocene non-avian dinosaurs, fossils of non-avian dinosaurs found in rock layers that date to after the KPG boundary, is controversial but not entirely dismissible. Several sites in North America and Asia have produced fossils that at least some researchers believe represent genuine Paleocene survival rather than reworked Cretaceous material. The mainstream interpretation is that these fossils were physically transported from older into younger geological layers by erosional processes, and this explanation is probably correct in most cases. But the probability that every single claimed Paleocene dinosaur fossil is the result of reworking, with no genuine post-impact survivors anywhere, is perhaps not quite 100%. In a world where the impossible is merely unlikely, where the gap can be stretched a little at both ends, where the definition of human reaches back into the deep evolutionary past, and the actual end of the non-avian dinosaurs was perhaps somewhat later than their last certain fossils, the gap between them and us might be narrowed, at least theoretically, to something less than the standard 66 million years. Not dramatically narrowed, not to the point where any serious scientist would say the coexistence was real or likely, but narrowed, at least conceptually, to a point where the question deserves to be asked. And there is one more consideration, or perhaps the most interesting of all, that bears on the question of the almost. The molecular evidence. Geneticists and evolutionary biologists can use the accumulated differences between the DNA of living species to estimate when their lineages diverged. This technique, called molecular clock analysis, has been applied to the major mammalian lineages to ask, when did the main groups of placental mammals, the primates, the rodents, the carnivores, the hoofed animals, the bats, the whales, and all the others, originate? The fossil record, taken at face value, suggests that most of these groups originated in the early Paleocene, after the KPG extinction, as a rapid response to the ecological vacuum left by the dinosaurs. But the molecular clock evidence tells a different story. It consistently suggests that many or most of the major placental mammalian lineages originated much earlier, 80, 90, even 100 million years ago, well within the Cretaceous, while the non-avian dinosaurs were still alive. This is controversial. The fossil record for these early Cretaceous mammals is thin, and some researchers argue that the molecular clocks are running too fast, and the estimated divergence dates are too ancient. The debate between the fossil record and the molecular evidence, a debate that has been ongoing for decades, is not resolved. But if the molecular evidence is correct, if the ancestors of the primates diverged from the other mammals 80 or 90 million years ago, in the late Cretaceous, then there were creatures on Earth at the same time as the non-avian dinosaurs that were, in a very real biological sense, the first primates. Not hominins, not apes, not monkeys, just the earliest, tiniest, most primitive members of the lineage that would eventually produce all of those things, including us. Primate ancestors, living alongside non-avian dinosaurs, the almost coexistence not theoretical but real, just not between anything recognizably human and anything recognizably dinosaurian. That thought is worth letting settle. The most distant ancestors of your lineage may have climbed through trees in forests where non-avian dinosaurs walked below. The two lineages, the one that would one day produce Tyrannosaurus rex and the one that would one day produce you, shared a world, briefly, at the very beginning. And then the sky fell, and the world was divided into before and after. Rest with that thought. Let it be large and still and quiet in your mind. We are going to go further into the almost now, into the world that might have been. Let us do something different now. Let us step, carefully and with full awareness that we are doing so, into the realm of the speculative. Not the wildly speculative, not the kind of speculation that ignores biology and physics and the rules of the natural world to tell a more exciting story. The grounded speculative, the kind that paleontologists and evolutionary biologists practice when they ask what if. The kind that says, here is what we know, here is what the evidence allows, and here, within those constraints, is a possibility worth imagining. The time is approximately 2.5 million years ago. The Pliocene is ending and the Pleistocene is beginning. The world is entering the era of glaciations, the ice ages, the long alternating cycles of glacial advance and retreat that will shape the next 2 million years of Earth's history. Global temperatures are declining. The great glaciers that will eventually cover much of the northern hemisphere are not yet at their maximum extent, but they are building. In Africa, on the eastern savannas and forest edges of what is now Ethiopia, Kenya and Tanzania, the hominin lineage is in a critical period of diversification. Several species of early humans, members of the genus Australopithecus, and perhaps the earliest members of the genus Homo, are present in this landscape. They are small by our standards. The Australopithecines average about 1.2 to 1.5 metres in height, with brains roughly a third the size of ours. They walk upright with reasonable efficiency, though their posture and gait are somewhat different from modern human locomotion. They use simple stone tools, the Oldowan technology, the oldest known stone tool industry, consisting of stones struck together to produce a sharp edge. They live in complex social groups. They communicate with a form of proto-language, not modern language, with its fully recursive grammar and infinite expressive range, but something richer than the vocalizations of chimpanzees. They have begun to understand fire, though they may not yet be reliably able to create it. They hunt small animals and scavenge from larger kills, supplementing a diet of plant foods with occasional meat. They are not us, but they are closer to us than anything that came before. They are the closest predecessors we have. Now let us introduce into this world, into this Pliocene/Pleistocene Africa, a survival, a remnant, a small isolated population of non-avian dinosaurs that has somehow, impossibly, persisted through 63 million years of the Cenozoic era. Let us not be coy about the implausibility of this. We are imagining something that certainly did not happen, and we are doing so not to pretend it did, but to ask, what might that encounter have looked like? What would have happened? The surviving dinosaur, in our imagined world, are small theropods. They are the descendants of small, feathered, intelligent theropods from the late Cretaceous, and 63 million years of additional evolution have continued to shape them. They are not the dinosaurs of museum exhibits and film sets. They do not look like velociraptors or Deinonychus or any other Cretaceous species. They look like what 63 million years of additional evolution might produce from such a starting point. They are in many ways more similar to modern birds than to their Cretaceous ancestors. But unlike any modern bird, they do not fly. They have maintained a terrestrial lifestyle through all those millions of years, filling an ecological niche that in the actual world is occupied by large ground-dwelling birds. They are social. The Cretaceous theropods that were their ancestors were already showing signs of social behaviour, pack hunting, nest guarding, possible vocal communication. 63 million years of evolution in a world that includes social mammals has reinforced and elaborated those tendencies. They live in groups of perhaps 5 to 15 individuals, with a social structure built around kinship and coalition, not entirely unlike the social structures of the hominins they are about to encounter. Their intelligence is significant. Not human intelligence, not language, not abstraction, not the capacity to build models of the world and reason about hypotheticals, but the kind of practical, flexible intelligence that we see in the smartest birds, in crows and ravens and cockatoos. The ability to solve novel problems, the ability to recognize individuals and remember past encounters, the ability to deceive and to detect deception, the ability to use simple tools in some contexts. They are, in other words, the kind of animal that a hominin group would take seriously. Imagine the first encounter. Not a dramatic, choreographed confrontation, but the ordinary kind of encounter that happens when two groups of animals with overlapping habitat ranges come into contact for the first time. A small group of Australopithecines, perhaps 5 or 6 adults with several juveniles, is moving through a stretch of dry woodland at the edge of a water source. It is mid-morning. They have been foraging since just after dawn, digging for tubers in the dry soil, watching for opportunities. And then one of them stops. The others stop too, because when one member of a hominin group stops suddenly, the rest of them notice and respond. There is something ahead. Something in the shadows of a stand of acacia trees that does not behave like the animals they know. The shape that emerges from the shadow is bipedal. That would be the first, most immediately strange thing about it. There are very few bipedal animals in the African savanna ecosystem, and the hominins that formed the world model these creatures carry in their minds would not have a ready category for what they are seeing. It is not a bird, though it moves somewhat like one. It is not a mammal, though it is roughly the right size. It is something else entirely, something that violates the taxonomy of the familiar world in a way that demands attention and processing. The thing in the shadow stops too. It has seen the hominins. Its large, forward-facing eyes, inherited from a lineage with excellent binocular vision, shaped by millions of years of predatory pressure, are fixed on the small, upright primates in the clearing. It tilts its head in the characteristic way of intelligent, visually oriented animals, a gesture so bird-like that it would look familiar somehow, even against the backdrop of everything else that is strange. And for a moment, a brief, electrically charged moment, nothing happens. Neither group flees, neither attacks. They are separated by perhaps 30 or 40 meters of open ground, and they are simply looking at each other, processing, trying to build a model of what the other is. The hominins, with their social intelligence and their communicative sophistication, and their tendency to share information within the group, are probably already doing something remarkable. They are communicating about what they are seeing, not in language, but in the gestural and vocal shorthand of a social species that has been sharing information about the environment for millions of years. They are telling each other, there is something here, it is unusual, it is potentially dangerous. Watch. The dinosaur is doing something different. Its cognitive processes are organized differently from a mammal's, the result of 63 million years of parallel evolution along an entirely different architectural plan. But the functional outcome may be surprisingly similar. It is assessing. It is trying to determine whether the things in the clearing are prey, predator, competitor, or something none of those categories account for. Prey, it decides, if dinosaur cognition can be said to decide, as is unlikely. These upright creatures are moving deliberately, making sounds to each other, and they have that particular quality of coordinated attention that signals social intelligence. They are not behaving like prey. Predator seems unlikely too, for similar reasons. They are smaller than the dinosaur, without obvious weaponry, and their posture is investigative rather than threatening. Competitor is possible, but they seem to be using a different set of resources. None of those categories. And in that moment of mutual category failure, something remarkable happens. Curiosity overrides fear in both groups simultaneously. The Australopithecines move a little closer. The dinosaur does not retreat. For a minute, perhaps two, the two groups regard each other across a stretch of dry savanna that spans not just 30 meters of physical space, but 63 million years of evolutionary divergence. Then something startles one of the juvenile hominins, perhaps a bird, perhaps a rustle in the grass, and the moment breaks. The group moves away, quickly but without panic. The dinosaur watches them go. Then it too turns and melts back into the shadow of the acacias. But something happened there. Something was encoded in the neural patterns of both groups. A new category, a new entry in the mental catalogue of things that exist in the world. Something was learned. And that learning in our imagined world would be the beginning of something. Let the image of that clearing rest in your mind. Let it be gentle and still, not threatening, not dramatic, just quietly astonishing. Two lineages, two histories, one clearing, one morning. The almost made almost real. There is a phrase that paleontologists use that I have always found quietly thrilling. The phrase is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It sounds like a logical principle, and it is. But in the context of the fossil record, it carries a specific weight that goes beyond logic. It carries the weight of geological uncertainty, the acknowledgement that what we do not find is not the same as what did not exist. The fossil record is, in the most fundamental sense, a story told by survivors. Not the survivors of the extinction events it documents, but the survivors of the process of preservation itself. A bone becomes a fossil only under very specific conditions. The animal must die in a location where sediment can quickly cover the remains, protecting them from the weathering and scavenging that would otherwise destroy them. The sediment must then undergo the long process of lithification, hardening into rock, while the bone is gradually replaced by minerals from the surrounding matrix. The resulting fossil must then survive millions of years of geological activity, erosion, burial under new deposits, tectonic deformation, without being destroyed. And finally, the fossil must be exposed at the surface by erosion or human excavation, in a place where a paleontologist will find it within the small window of time before it is weathered away again. The probability of any given animal leaving a fossil that will be found and recognized by a scientist is vanishingly small. Estimates vary, but some calculations suggest that for every species that has ever lived, only a tiny fraction of 1% will ever be represented in the fossil record as we know it. For most of the animals that have ever existed, there is no trace. They lived, they died, and then they vanished from the world as completely as if they had never been. This is the context in which we should read extinction dates. When we say that the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, we mean that the last known fossil of a non-avian dinosaur comes from sediments dating to approximately that time. But the last known fossil is not the last individual. There was a last individual, the final member of the last population of the last species, and that individual died at some definite moment. And because the probability of any given individual leaving a fossil is so low, the probability that the last individual left a fossil that was found by scientists is very nearly zero. This means that the actual moment of extinction was almost certainly later than the last fossil suggests. By how much? The Signor-Lipps effect, which formalizes this observation, predicts that the apparent end of a lineage in the fossil record will precede the actual end by a period that depends on how common the organism was, how good the fossilization conditions were, and how intensively the relevant rocks have been sampled. For common, well-preserved, extensively studied organisms like large dinosaurs in North America, this Signor-Lipps correction might be relatively small, perhaps tens of thousands of years. For rarer organisms or ones from poorly sampled regions, the correction could be much larger. Now let's combine this with another piece of the puzzle, the geographic unevenness of our knowledge. The late Cretaceous and early Paleocene fossil records are not sampled equally around the world. They are extraordinarily well known in certain parts of North America, particularly the Hell Creek Formation of Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, which has been studied intensively for over a century and has produced some of the most important KPG boundary fossils in the world. They are reasonably well known in parts of Europe and Asia, particularly in places where the relevant rock formations are exposed and accessible. But large parts of the world are essentially unknown to us from this time period. Central Africa, the interior of South America, Southeast Asia and the islands of the Pacific, Antarctica. These regions were geographically connected to or influenced by the regions we know better, but their fossil records are fragmentary, poorly sampled or entirely absent. What might be hiding in those gaps? The honest answer is, we don't know. And we don't know in a way that should make us humble about confident statements regarding the completeness of our knowledge. The KPG extinction was real and devastating, and the non-avian dinosaurs almost certainly did not survive it in any significant numbers anywhere on the planet for very long. But almost certainly is not the same as certainly, and long is a relative term when we're talking about geological time. There is a concept in conservation biology called the extinction debt, the observation that a population can be effectively doomed to extinction long before the last individual actually dies. A species that has been reduced below a certain minimum viable population size, or that has lost enough of its habitat to make long-term survival impossible, may continue to exist for years or decades or centuries, even after the processes that will eventually eliminate it are already irreversibly in motion. The population is functionally extinct even while individuals still survive. The non-avian dinosaurs at the KPG boundary were almost certainly in exactly this situation. The catastrophic collapse of the food chain made the extinction of large-bodied dinosaurs essentially inevitable from the moment of the impact. But the final playing out of that inevitability, the actual death of the last member of the last surviving population, would have taken time, possibly quite a bit of time, in scattered refugia where local conditions provided some temporary buffer against the worst effects of the global catastrophe. How much time? The fossil record cannot tell us precisely, but the biology of the survivors, small, adaptable, opportunistic, capable of surviving on minimal food supplies, suggests that the period could have been measured in thousands of years, or perhaps even tens of thousands. In the context of a 66 million year gap, this is trivial, but it is not zero, and the non-zero character of the survival period is the biological grounding for our imaginary world tonight, the scientific seed from which the speculative flower of our story grows. There is one more piece of evidence worth considering, and it comes from an unexpected direction: the genome. In recent years, advances in ancient DNA technology have made it possible to read genetic sequences from fossils that are tens of thousands of years old. This technology has transformed our understanding of human evolution and the evolution of the large mammals that lived alongside our ancestors during the Pleistocene. It has revealed the reality of ancient populations we had not known existed, uncovered the evidence of interbreeding between species we had thought were separate, and given us a new and much richer picture of the evolutionary past. But ancient DNA cannot survive for millions of years. The chemistry of DNA degradation is well understood, and at room temperature, no DNA molecule survives intact for more than a few million years at the absolute outside. This means that we will never read the genome of a Cretaceous dinosaur from preserved genetic material. The genetic evidence we have about dinosaur biology comes entirely from living birds, from the comparative genomics of the avian dinosaur lineage, rather than from direct sequencing of non-avian DNA. This is a limitation, but it is also, in a way, an opening, because the genomes of living birds carry within them the accumulated evolutionary history of the entire dinosaur lineage. The genetic sequences that encode the basic architecture of the theropod body plan, the skeletal proportions, the feather-producing proteins, the egg-incubating behaviors, the vocal apparatus, are all there, modified and overlaid by 150 million years of bird-specific evolution, but not erased. By comparing the genomes of living birds with each other, and with those of other reptiles, we can reconstruct something of the genetic heritage of the non-avian dinosaurs, not from their own preserved DNA, but from its echoes in their living descendants. And what those echoes tell us about the cognitive potential of the theropod lineage is, at minimum, intriguing. The genes associated with brain development in birds, particularly in the highly intelligent corvid and parrot lineages, show evidence of positive selection for increased neuronal density and cognitive flexibility. These are not simple automatic traits. They are the product of evolutionary pressure acting on a genome that already had the raw material for intelligence, inherited from theropod ancestors that were, by reptilian standards, already unusually cognitively sophisticated. The dinosaurs were not stupid, not the theropods, not the lineage that produced the birds. They were, by the standards of the Mesozoic, among the most cognitively capable animals on the planet, and their descendants, the birds, have taken that cognitive heritage and run with it across 66 million years of additional evolution. In the world where some of those descendants remained on the ground, in the world of our imaginary survival, 66 million additional years of cognitive evolution along the theropod line might have produced something extraordinary, something that the word intelligence barely contains. Let that thought settle gently, like a feather on still water, not with urgency, not with excitement that keeps you awake, just with the quiet appreciation of an extraordinary possibility, held lightly in the mind as you breathe, as you rest, as the night deepens around you. There is a quality of relationship between two intelligent species that does not have a single simple name. It is more than competition, and more than cooperation. It is something that combines both, simultaneously, in a dynamic that does not resolve into one or the other, but holds them both at once. Biologists sometimes call it coevolution, but that word does not quite capture the richness of what happens when two cognitively sophisticated lineages encounter each other and begin the long, slow process of adapting to each other's presence. Let us think carefully about what that process might have looked like in our imagined world, the world where a remnant population of non-avian theropod dinosaurs persisted into the Pliocene, into the same time and place as the first members of the genus Homo. Begin with the simplest and most immediate effects. A hominin group that regularly encounters a large, intelligent bipedal predator, or potential predator or competitor for prey, will be under strong selection pressure to develop better strategies for detecting, avoiding, and in some cases confronting that predator. The specific nature of the dinosaur, its sensory capabilities, its behavioral patterns, its social structure, its hunting strategies, would shape the specific nature of the adaptive response. Theropod dinosaurs, including their bird descendants, have excellent visual acuity. Many birds can see into the ultraviolet spectrum, and it is likely that many theropods could too. This means that a dinosaurian predator would see aspects of its prey, colour patterns, reflective properties, that a mammalian predator would miss. A hominin group adapting to the presence of dinosaurian predators might have developed more sophisticated camouflage strategies, or more complex group coordination to deal with a predator that could see things they could not. Theropod dinosaurs are also primarily visual hunters, like birds, rather than olfactory hunters like many mammals. The strategies that hominins use to evade mammalian predators, staying downwind, masking scent, would be largely irrelevant against a visual hunter. New strategies would be needed, more complex group formations perhaps, more sophisticated use of terrain and cover, the use of noise and visual distraction in coordinated ways. All of these adaptive pressures would have pushed hominin cognition in specific directions. The need to model the behavior of a non-mammalian predator, one whose behavioral repertoire was, in key ways, alien to the mammalian mind, would have demanded new cognitive tools, new categories, new models of intention and behavior that did not map onto the familiar templates of the mammalian social world. And this cognitive demand would have been accompanied by something even more interesting: the possibility of learning from observation of the dinosaurian behavior itself. Hominins, particularly later hominins, those with the cognitive sophistication to engage in genuine imitative learning, are extraordinarily good at watching other animals and extracting useful information from their behavior. The hominins who watched the dinosaurs hunt would have learned something about how the dinosaurs identified prey, how they coordinated group hunts, how they signaled to each other. This learning would have been a one-way transfer of useful behavioral information from a lineage that had been refining its predatory strategies for 160 million years to a lineage that was still developing its hunting capabilities. The dinosaurs might have been, in a strange and indirect way, teachers, not intentionally, not cooperatively, simply by existing and by behaving in ways that the watching hominins could observe and learn from. Now consider the reverse direction. What might the dinosaurian lineage have learned from the presence of hominins? The most immediately relevant thing about hominins, from a theropod dinosaur's perspective, would have been their social coordination. A group of even early hominins, Australopithecines or early Homo, is a qualitatively different kind of animal than the individual prey items and competitors that a theropod would have encountered previously. They communicate with each other, they coordinate their behavior in response to external threats. They share information about the environment in ways that give the group a collective awareness that no individual member of the group could achieve alone. Against this kind of social coordination, a theropod predator that has evolved strategies for hunting solitary prey or loosely coordinated mammalian herds would find its usual approaches less effective. The prey can warn each other. The prey can work together to deter or drive away the predator. The prey can, in some circumstances, actively counterattack with tools. This would impose selection pressure on the dinosaurian cognitive system to develop more sophisticated social strategies of its own, more complex communication, more flexible group behavior, a better capacity to model the behavior of the other group and predict what it was about to do. In other words, the same pressures that were shaping hominin cognition would also, in our imagined world, be shaping dinosaurian cognition. The two lineages would be locked in a cognitive arms race, each becoming more intelligent in response to the challenge posed by the other. This is not a fantasy. It is a well-documented process in the actual world. The evolution of intelligence in primates, particularly in the social primates including the hominins, is thought to have been driven largely by the complexity of social life itself, the need to track alliances and rivalries, to predict the behavior of other individuals, to deceive and detect deception, to cooperate in coordinated group activities. The social brain hypothesis, as it is called, identifies the complexity of the social world as the primary driver of primate cognitive evolution. If the social world that drove hominin cognitive evolution had included not just other hominins, but also an intelligent non-mammalian competitor, the selection pressure would have been more intense, more varied, more demanding. The resulting cognitive capabilities might have been more sophisticated, or developed faster, or taken different directions than the ones that actually emerged in the human lineage. And there is one more dimension to this imagined co-evolutionary relationship that deserves consideration, because it is perhaps the most interesting of all. It is the dimension of culture. Culture, the transmission of learned behaviours and knowledge from individual to individual and from generation to generation across time, is something that we tend to think of as a uniquely human achievement, and in its fullest, most elaborated form it is. Human culture is unique in its scope and complexity and cumulative nature, its capacity to build on itself across generations in ways that produce technologies and institutions and bodies of knowledge that no individual could create alone. But the beginnings of culture are not unique to humans. We see them in chimpanzees, in orangutans, in crows, in dolphins. We see them in any social species with sufficient cognitive complexity to learn behaviours from others and to pass those learned behaviours on. The question is not whether culture exists outside our species, but how elaborated and cumulative it can become. In our imagined world, the dinosaurian lineage, 63 million years of evolution from cognitively sophisticated Cretaceous ancestors shaped by competition with social mammals and then by the specific challenge of the hominin encounter, might have developed a cultural system of its own, not writing, not technology in the human sense, but a system of transmitted knowledge, encoded in behaviour and vocalization, and perhaps in material arrangements of the environment that accumulated across generations and gave each new generation a head start over what individual learning alone could achieve. Two cultural lineages, two accumulated bodies of transmitted knowledge, developing alongside each other, responding to each other, perhaps, in ways that are difficult to imagine precisely because we have no real-world analogue for them, learning from each other. That is the deep wonder at the heart of the almost. Not just two species in proximity, but two kinds of intelligence, two kinds of experience, two ways of being a thinking creature in the world, discovering each other across a gulf of 63 million years of divergent evolution and beginning, slowly, tentatively, imperfectly to communicate. Let that possibility sit with you in the quiet of the night, not with the urgency of a thought that demands you stay awake to resolve it, with the weightless quality of a question that is content to remain a question. You don't need to answer it. You just need to hold it for a moment and then let it go as sleep comes and take it with you into whatever dreams this night holds. Let's come back now from the imaginary world of our almost and return to this one, this actual world. The world as it is, right now, tonight, with you lying in the dark and the sound of whatever sounds make up the quiet of your particular night surrounding you. Because this world too has its wonders. This world too is full of the dinosaurs. Not in the imaginary sense, in the real one. Look out the window if you can, or just imagine doing it. The sky outside, wherever you are, contains birds, even at night. Owls, if you're in a place where owls are present. The various nocturnal birds that navigate the darkness on silent wings. And in the morning, when the light comes back, there will be more. Sparrows and finches and thrushes and robins and crows and whatever species call your particular corner of the world home, they will be doing what birds have been doing for 150 million years, singing, foraging, competing, reproducing, living their brief and intense lives in the present moment. Every one of them is a dinosaur. We have said this before, but it bears repeating, because repetition is the only way to make the familiar feel as extraordinary as it actually is. Every bird alive today is a direct descendant of the theropod dinosaurs that walked the earth in the Jurassic and Cretaceous. Not a metaphorical descendant, a literal one. The evolutionary lineage is unbroken and undeniable. The birds are the dinosaurs that survived. The anatomical evidence for this is overwhelming, and it has been accumulating for over 150 years, since Thomas Henry Huxley first noted the remarkable skeletal similarities between Archaeopteryx, the famous early bird from the Jurassic Solnhofen limestone of Germany, and small theropod dinosaurs. Since then, the discovery of dozens of feathered dinosaur species, particularly from the extraordinary late Cretaceous deposits of Liaoning province in northeastern China, has filled in the evolutionary sequence in remarkable detail. We can trace, step by step, the gradual transformation of the theropod body plan into the bird body plan, the lengthening of the arm bones, the reduction and eventual loss of certain hand and foot bones, the development of the wishbone, the modification of the shoulder joint to allow the arm to swing upward for flight, the appearance and elaboration of feathers, the changes in the skull that produced the beak. The dinosaurs did not disappear, they evolved, they transformed, They took one particular branch of the theropod tree and followed it into the sky, and they have been there ever since. But the dinosaurian presence in our world is not limited to birds. It extends in more diffuse but equally real ways into almost every aspect of the living world we inhabit. Consider the insects. The extraordinary diversity of insect life on Earth today, over 1 million described species, with estimates of the total ranging from 5 million to 30 million, is, in large part, a product of the coevolution between insects and flowering plants. And the flowering plants, the angiosperms, which today account for over 90% of all plant species on Earth, and which underlie almost all terrestrial food chains, diversified explosively during the Cretaceous period, in a world shaped and structured by the dinosaurs. The trampling of large herbivorous dinosaurs created open areas in forests where light-loving plants could grow. The browsing of sauropods and hadrosaurs created selection pressure for chemical defenses, structural reinforcements, and reproductive strategies in plants that laid the groundwork for the extraordinary plant diversity of the modern world. The forests we walk through today, the meadows and grasslands and wetlands, all of them are, in some deep sense, the legacy of 165 million years of dinosaur ecology. The plants are different. The dinosaurs are gone, in the non-avian sense. But the ecological patterns that the dinosaurs established, the basic relationships between large herbivores and plant communities, the role of animal activity in creating and maintaining habitat diversity, those patterns persist in modified forms in the ecosystems of today. There is more. Think about the amber deposits that are found in various parts of the world, ancient resin from Cretaceous and Paleocene trees, hardened over millions of years into the golden translucent stone that jewelers prize and scientists study with reverence. Amber from the Cretaceous, from deposits in Myanmar, from the Baltic, from sites in Canada and New Jersey, contains, preserved in extraordinary detail, the remnants of the Cretaceous world. Insects trapped in resin while dinosaurs walked nearby. Feathers, sometimes whole feathers, with their detailed structure intact, in some cases still showing colour patterns that must have shone against the Cretaceous sky. Tiny lizards, plant fragments, pollen, the microscopic architecture of a world that ended 66 million years ago, preserved in perfect three-dimensional detail in stone. These amber fossils are time capsules. When you look at a piece of Burmese amber under a microscope and see an ant or a mite or a piece of a spider's web from 100 million years ago, you are looking at the Cretaceous world in a level of detail that no amount of bone fossil could provide. You are seeing the texture of a world that the dinosaurs inhabited, and in that seeing, in that direct visual connection to the ancient past, the 66 million year gap shrinks, at least psychologically, to something manageable. But the deepest and most interesting place where the dinosaurs persist in our world is not in the birds or the forests or the amber. It is in us, in the human psyche, in the particular combination of fascination and fear and awe that we feel when we encounter the evidence of the dinosaurs' existence. Think about the reaction that children have to dinosaurs, not learned, not taught, spontaneous, immediate, almost universal. The eyes widen, the breath quickens. Something lights up in the face, and the body that is not quite the same as the response to other large animals, other wonders of the natural world. There is something specific about the dinosaurs that activates something specific in the human response. Something that feels older than understanding. Something that feels, in a word that I want to use carefully and precisely, primal. Some researchers have proposed that this response has a deep evolutionary substrate, that the human nervous system's particular attunement to large reptilian predators, the rapid, automatic response to certain combinations of size, posture, and movement that we associate with dangerous reptiles, is not a culturally constructed response, but a biologically evolved one, shaped by millions of years of primate evolution in environments that included large reptilian threats. Crocodiles, large monitor lizards, constrictors. The specific sensory signatures that trigger our fast visceral fear response are precisely the sensory signatures of a large, potentially dangerous reptile. And those fears were shaped in part by the world the dinosaurs made, not by the dinosaurs themselves. No human being has ever encountered a non-avian dinosaur, and the fears of our immediate primate ancestors were shaped by crocodiles and monitors and snakes, not by Cretaceous theropods. But the ecological context in which those fears evolved, the world where large reptiles were powerful and numerous and dangerous, that was a world that the dinosaurs had shaped across 165 million years of terrestrial dominance. The dinosaurs made us afraid of the right things. They shaped the ecology that shaped the predators that shaped our fear. And in that chain of causation, stretched across hundreds of millions of years, the dinosaurs are present in our deepest neural architecture, in the automatic responses that fire before conscious thought can engage. They are in us. They have always been in us. Not as genes. We share no direct genetic material with the non-avian dinosaurs, and even the genetic similarities between humans and birds are vastly outnumbered by the differences. But, as evolutionary context, as the shapers of the world in which the primate lineage first developed its characteristic capabilities, as the absent giants whose presence defined the dimensions of the ecological space in which our ancestors first learned what it meant to be alive, the dinosaurs are not gone, they never were. And in the morning when the birds begin to sing outside your window, listen for a moment before you open your eyes. Listen to the sound of 150 million years of continuous evolution, the unbroken thread from the Jurassic to this morning, the voice of the lineage that ruled the earth before us and whose presence is woven into the fabric of everything we are. That is not an almost, that's a fact, a beautiful, ancient, absolutely real fact. We have been exploring the almost from one direction, from the direction of survival and persistence, asking how close the non-avian dinosaurs might have come to lasting long enough to encounter our ancestors. Now let us approach it from the other direction entirely. Let us ask the largest and most vertiginous of the what-ifs. What if the asteroid had missed? The Chicxulub impactor was, as we have discussed, a rock roughly 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, travelling at tremendous speed. At the moment of impact, it delivered a quantity of kinetic energy equivalent to approximately 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. It was, in a very real sense, one of the most consequential events in the history of complex life on Earth. But it was also, in the cosmic sense, ordinary. Asteroids of various sizes strike the Earth regularly, on geological timescales, regularly. Smaller impacts happen frequently. Larger impacts happen less frequently, but they happen. The solar system is full of debris, the remnants of the formation of the planets and of subsequent orbital disruptions. And the Earth, over the course of its 4.5 billion year history, has been struck by an enormous number of objects ranging from microscopic dust grains to impactors comparable in scale to Chicxulub. The specific trajectory that brought the Chicxulub impactor to the Yucatan Peninsula at that particular moment in the late Cretaceous was one of a vast number of possible trajectories. The impactor's path through the inner solar system was determined by the gravitational influences of Jupiter and the other outer planets, by the cumulative effects of countless small perturbations over millions of years of travel. A slightly different initial condition, a marginally different velocity, a fractionally different angle, a gravitational nudge from a passing object that happened not to occur, could have sent it on a completely different path. One that passed inside the Earth's orbit without hitting it. One that hit the deep ocean rather than the continental shelf, producing a massive tsunami but far less atmospheric disruption. One that hit the Earth a million years earlier, or a million years later, when the Cretaceous ecosystem was configured differently, and the survivors of the impact might have been a different set of organisms. The miss was possible, easily possible. From the perspective of the impactor and its orbital mechanics, a near miss would have been just as likely as a direct hit. More likely, in fact, since the target, the Earth, is a small object on the scale of the solar system. So let us travel down the road that was not taken. Let us imagine the Cretaceous continuing. In the immediate aftermath of the not happening of the KPG extinction, the late Cretaceous world continues exactly as it has been. The asteroid passes harmlessly by, or strikes the deep ocean, or hits the Earth but less catastrophically, and the non-avian dinosaurs survive. The mammals survive too, the small, nocturnal, insectivorous creatures that were already present in the late Cretaceous forests. The birds, already evolved and diversifying, continue their evolutionary trajectory. The flowering plants continue to diversify and spread. For the first few million years after the mist impact, the world would look not very different from the late Cretaceous. The same basic ecosystem structure, Large dinosaurian herbivores shaping the vegetation, large theropods at the apex of the terrestrial food chain, small mammals and birds occupying the smaller ecological niches, marine reptiles dominating the oceans. But evolution does not stop. It never stops. The world would have continued to change in the slow, patient way that evolutionary change always works. One generation at a time, one mutation at a time, one selective pressure at a time. Over millions of years, the dinosaurian ecosystem would have changed in ways that are genuinely difficult to predict. We know from the evidence of the Cretaceous itself that dinosaurian evolution was not static. Over the 165 million years of the Mesozoic, the dinosaurs had diversified into an extraordinary array of forms. The sauropods of the Jurassic were very different from the sauropods of the Cretaceous. The predatory theropods had evolved from the relatively simple bipedal hunters of the Triassic to the feathered, socially complex animals of the late Cretaceous. The ornithopods, the duck-billed hadrosaurs and their relatives, had developed elaborate head crests that served complex social and communicative functions. The ceratopsians had evolved into animals with an astonishing diversity of horn and frill arrangements that almost certainly reflected sophisticated social signalling systems. The trend, in other words, was toward increasing complexity, increasing social sophistication, increasing cognitive capacity, not uniformly, not in every lineage, not in a linear march toward any predetermined destination, but on average, across the diversity of dinosaurian evolution, the tendency was toward more elaborate behavior and more sophisticated brains. If that trend had continued for another 66 million years, if the non-avian dinosaurs had remained dominant through the equivalent of our Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene and Pliocene, where might it have led? The paleontologist and science writer Peter Ward has argued that the dinosaurs, if they had survived, would not have produced anything like human intelligence. The conditions that produced human intelligence, the particular combination of arboreal ancestry, bipedal locomotion, dietary flexibility, social complexity, and environmental variability, were, in his view, specifically mammalian and would not have been replicated by the dinosaurian lineage. Dinosaurian evolution, continuing without the KPG disruption, might have remained sophisticated but not transcendent. The large herbivores might have developed even more elaborate social display systems. The apex predators might have become even more effective hunters. But nothing that could be called intelligence in the sense we mean when we apply the word to ourselves. Others are less certain. The cognitive capacities of modern birds, particularly the corvids and parrots, suggest that the theropod lineage had already developed, by the end of the Cretaceous, the basic neural architecture for sophisticated cognition. The dinosaurid hypothesis of Dale Russell, however flawed its specific predictions, raises a genuine question about whether 66 million additional years of evolution might have taken certain theropod lineages into genuinely new cognitive territory. The honest answer is that we don't know. We can't know. Evolution is contingent. It depends on specific historical conditions that we can neither predict nor fully reconstruct. The only certain thing is that the world of the non-impact Cretaceous would have been different from ours, in ways ranging from the trivial to the profound, and that the differences would have compounded across millions of years into a world that we would barely recognize. One thing seems clear, though. In the world where the asteroid missed, there would be no humans. Not as we are. Not with this particular evolutionary history, these particular cognitive capabilities, this particular cultural and biological heritage. The mammals would have remained marginal, present, diverse in their way, but constrained to the smaller ecological niches that the dominant dinosaurs had left available. The primates, if they had evolved at all in such a world, would have been very different from the primates we know. Smaller, less cognitively sophisticated, without the particular combination of environmental pressures that drove the hominin lineage toward upright walking and large brains and language. And so the road not taken leads ultimately to a world without us. A world that might be extraordinary in its own ways, richer in dinosaurian diversity perhaps, with behavioral and possibly cognitive complexity of kinds we cannot fully imagine, but a world without the particular kind of consciousness that is asking these questions tonight. We exist because the asteroid hit. We exist because 66 million years ago, a rock from space destroyed the world that had existed for 165 million years and created, in the wreckage, the space in which the mammals could finally become what they had always had the potential to be. That is a strange and humbling thing to contemplate. We owe our existence, in the most direct causal sense, to a catastrophe. We are the children of the impact. We are here because the dinosaurs, most of the dinosaurs, are not. And yet the dinosaurs are still here, in the birds, in the sky above us, in the morning song. Let that thought hold you gently as the night deepens. The asteroid hit. The dinosaurs mostly died. The mammals rose. We are here, asking questions in the dark. And the birds are singing in the morning, as they always do, carrying the ancient flag of the lineage that was here first. We have travelled a long way tonight, farther back in time than any human being has ever lived, into geological epochs that existed before our species, before our genus, before our order, before our class, back to a world where the very concept of us did not exist even as a possibility. We have walked through the late Cretaceous and watched the dinosaurs in the fullness of their dominance. We have watched the sky fall and the world change and the small mammals emerge from the wreckage to inherit a planet that had just been remade. We have followed the long, patient ascent of the mammals across 66 million years of diversification and evolution, from the first tiny Paleocene insectivores to the Australopithecines of the African savanna. We have asked whether the gap between those two stories, the dinosaur story and the human story, could ever have closed, and we have found that the answer is more interesting than a simple yes or no. We have imagined the almost world where it did close, where a remnant theropod population persisted into the Pliocene and encountered the first members of our genus, and we have thought about what that encounter might have meant for the evolution of both lineages. We have examined the science of the near miss, the Signor-Lipps effect, the gaps in the fossil record, the molecular clock evidence that places early primate ancestors in the late Cretaceous, and we have found genuine scientific grounding for the question we are asking, not proof of coexistence, never that, but reason to wonder, room to ask. And we have come back finally to this world, the real one, and found it full of dinosaurs after all. Now let us take a step back from the specific questions of our story and ask what the whole of it teaches us. What can 66 million years of deep time and evolutionary contingency tell us about our place in the world, about the nature of existence, about what it means to be the particular kind of creature that lies in the dark and wonders about the past? The first thing deep time teaches us is humility, not the artificial performed humility of a creature that says I am insignificant while secretly believing the opposite. Genuine, earned, geologically grounded humility in the face of numbers that actually change how the world feels. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. The non-avian dinosaurs existed for 165 million years. Our genus has existed for perhaps 3 million years. Our species has existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Written human history spans perhaps 5,000 years. The oldest living person you will ever meet has lived perhaps 100 years. Put those numbers in a row and look at them. The span of a human life, the longest possible span, the outer edge of what is biologically achievable, is to the age of the Earth what a single second is to a year, less than that. The entire history of our species is to the reign of the dinosaurs what a single afternoon is to a human lifetime. We are, in geological terms, brand new. We are so new that the sediment layers of our existence have barely begun to form. We are so new that most of what has happened on this planet happened before we existed to observe or remember it. We came in at the end of an extraordinarily long story, and we have been here for the briefest of moments. And yet we are here now, and we are asking questions. We are the only part of the story that is aware of the rest of it. The Cretaceous dinosaurs, magnificent as they were, did not know they were magnificent. They did not wonder about the world that came before them. They did not imagine the world that might come after. They lived in an eternal present, responding to the immediate demands of survival and reproduction, as all animals do. We are different. We are the first part of a life's long story to be aware of the story. We can look back 66 million years and wonder. We can look forward into the future and imagine. We can take the evidence from rocks and genes and compare the molecular clocks of living species and construct a picture of a world that ended before we existed. That capacity, the capacity to reconstruct the past, to imagine the possible, to extend our awareness backward and forward across time, is new in the history of life. It emerged very recently, It is, as far as we know, unique. And that uniqueness carries with it a kind of responsibility. Not a burden, but a gift that comes with an obligation. If we are the only part of life that is aware of life's history, then we are the custodians of that history. We are the ones who remember the dinosaurs. We are the ones who can appreciate the 165 million years of the Mesozoic, the extraordinary diversity of the Cretaceous world, the magnitude of the extinction that ended it, and the improbable chain of contingencies that led from the wreckage to us. The second thing Deep Time teaches us is contingency. Nothing about the world as it is was inevitable. Every specific outcome, including our existence, was one of many possible outcomes, and the ones that occurred rather than the ones that didn't depended on a series of events and conditions and accidents that might easily have been different. The asteroid might have missed. The mammals might have remained marginal. The primate lineage might have gone extinct in the Oligocene cooling. The hominin lineage might have died out in one of the many bottlenecks that our genetic diversity suggests it passed through. Any one of hundreds of specific historical events, being different, might have produced a world without us. This is not a reason for despair. It is a reason for gratitude. Or if not gratitude exactly, gratitude implies a giver, and these were not gifts, then appreciation. Appreciation for the extraordinary improbability of our existence. Appreciation for the fact that the asteroid hit, and the mammals survived, and the primates evolved, and the hominins walked upright, and here we are. The third thing Deep Time teaches us is connection. Not a sentimental connection, not a New Age spirituality about oneness with nature, but a hard, factual, biological connection to everything that came before. We share genetic material with the first single-celled organisms that appeared on Earth over 3 billion years ago. We share the basic biochemistry of life, the same genetic code, the same mechanism of protein synthesis, the same molecular building blocks, with every living thing on this planet, from bacteria to birds to plants to fungi. We are made of recycled star stuff. The carbon atoms in our bodies were forged in the hearts of stars that exploded before the Earth existed. The oxygen we breathe was produced by photosynthetic bacteria that lived billions of years before the first animal. The proteins in our muscles and our brains contain evolutionary heritage that stretches back through billions of years of life's history. And the birds singing outside our window in the morning, those living dinosaurs, those feathered continuations of the great Mesozoic lineage, they carry within them the same connection. They are part of the same story, a different chapter, a different voice, but the same astonishing, improbable, beautiful story. Deep Time does not make us smaller, it makes us larger. It extends us backward through history and connects us to everything that came before. And it reminds us that we are not the end of the story. We are a chapter in it. What comes after us, in the long unfolding of life on Earth, will carry its own connections forward, its own inheritance of the past, its own astonished awareness of the extraordinary fact that anything exists at all. Rest in that thought now. Let the deep time settle around you like something ancient and warm. You're part of a story 4.5 billion years long, and you are alive in it right now, tonight, breathing and wondering and drifting towards sleep. The dinosaurs were here, the birds are here, you are here, and the universe is large enough to contain all of it, all at once in the same unbroken present moment. That is enough. That is more than enough. And so we arrive gently at the end of our journey. We have travelled 66 million years and more tonight. We have walked through the forests of the Cretaceous and watched the great sauropods move like islands through the green. We have seen the sky fall and the darkness come and the small warm-blooded survivors emerge into a remade world. We have followed the long, patient ascent of the mammals and the even longer ascent of the primates and the extraordinary, improbable emergence of the hominin lineage. We have imagined the world where two extraordinary lineages came within reach of each other, and we have thought about what that meeting might have meant. And we have come back to now, to this night, to the particular quiet of the hours before dawn when the world is at its most still and the deep past feels closest. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. Let the story be complete now. Let it settle, like sediment slowly settling to the floor of an ancient sea, building the layers that will one day become the rock in which some future creature might find the fossil record of this world. The dinosaurs were here. They were magnificent. They were among the most successful land animals in the entire history of life on Earth, and they are still here, in the birds, in the amber, in the deep evolutionary heritage that shaped the world our ancestors learned to inhabit. They are here in our mythology and our dreams, and the ancient neural templates that make us look twice at a large shadow. You are here too, improbably and magnificently. You are the product of 4.5 billion years of planetary history, of 3 billion years of biological evolution, of 66 million years of mammalian diversification, of millions of years of primate evolution, and of the specific, unrepeatable chain of events that produced you, exactly you, tonight. Breathing, listening, almost asleep. Sleep now, dream of long-necked giants moving through warm green forests. Dream of small, bright-eyed mammals watching from the high branches. Dream of the clearing where two lineages almost met, where the morning light fell on feathers and fur and two sets of ancient eyes seeing each other across the longest distance that life has ever travelled. Dream of the almost, and let it carry you gently into the deep, quiet dark where everything is connected and nothing is ever truly gone. Good night. From the deep past, from the long story, from the extraordinary fact of being alive on this planet at this moment in its astonishing history. Good night. Two worlds, two lineages, the same threshold, reach from different directions through different evolutionary paths, by animals with different bodies and different brains and different histories, but converging, perhaps, on the same extraordinary place. The place where a creature looks up at the sky and wonders what is there. The place where a creature looks at the world around it and asks why. The place where a creature looks back through time and tells itself a story. That place, this place, here tonight in the dark. Two roads, leading to the same destination by completely different routes. The destination so specific, so improbable, so extraordinary that finding it once seems almost miraculous. Finding it twice, in the actual world and in an alternative one, suggests that it may be less miraculous than it seems, that the universe, given sufficient time and complexity, tends toward awareness, tends toward the question, tends perhaps toward something like tonight. Sleep now. Let the long story of the Earth continue without your conscious attention for a few hours. It will still be here when you wake. The birds will be singing in the morning. The dinosaurs still here, still filling the air with the evidence of their ancient and enduring presence. Listen for them. In the morning, listen, and remember what they are. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this extraordinary journey through deep time. If this video brought you peace, or wonder, or both, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It genuinely helps us create more content like this. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And our question for tonight, the one we would love to read your answers to when you wake. If you could spend one day in any period of the Mesozoic era, any moment in the age of the dinosaurs, from the Triassic through to the final afternoon of the Cretaceous, which moment would you choose? What would you want to see? What would you want to hear? Leave your answers below. I read everyone. Good night from 66 million years ago and today at the same time. Sleep well. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one.